just a thought. Just my opinion. It's just a thought. It's just a thought. Get out your feelings. It's just a thought. It's just a thought. It's my opinion. It's just a thought. It's just a thought. Get out your feelings.
What's going on, everybody? It's your girl, Sharí Nycole. Welcome to another episode of Just a Thought with Sharí Nycole, episode 100. I am super excited because I have visionary filmmaker Jeymes Samuel and one of the dopest actors I have ever witnessed on screen. I'm getting to meet for the first time LaKeith Stanfield. And they're talking about the Book of Clarence. It's opening in theaters on January 12th. I've seen it twice. It is incredible. It's a bold new take on the timeless Hollywood era. Biblical epic, streetwise but struggling Clarence, who's played by LaKeith, is trying to find a better life for himself and his family, make himself worthy to the woman he loves, and prove that he is not a nobody. An incredible film. Can't wait for you guys to see it. And without further ado, LaKeith, Jeymes, it's an honor and a pleasure to have you with me today.
Give thanks.
Absolutely. So let's jump right in. Jeymes, I want to start with you. You're no stranger to taking creative risks, which is one of the things I absolutely love about you.
Thank you.
How do you qualify a creative risk and then determine whether it's worth taking or not?
You know, I think you have to, as an artist, exist in truth. So I've always made films, whether short or as long as I could possibly do, and I've always made music. And I think when you do both of them, like LaKeith, when you do both of them, you are just used to kind of standing in your truth, and you don't realize it's a risk, and nor do you actually care. You just know it's a risk by other people's reaction.
Yeah.
So I knew that when I presented this script and all of the studios ran away, that, so for you guys it's a risk. For me, it's Monday. Right? These are the stories we have to tell. I don't think there's one person that we love as an artist or actor or that didn't do something different. Right?
Absolutely.
And we're all unique. You have to stand in your uniquity. And personally, I love those old school biblical movies. I just don't see no one that looks like me in them.
That's so good.
You know what I mean? And so I think this is a movie that we deserve.
Yeah.
And the first of its kind in 135 years of the moving image. Like, I don't really call it a risk. I just call it life.
You know what's interesting? I've never seen a movie like this, not even close.
Not even close.
And I mentioned to my friends, I said, this is a film that could be quite dangerous in the wrong hands. So I'm glad it fell into yours.
Thank you.
Because I did think you did an incredible job. LaKeith, I'll go to you.
Inspiration.
Absolutely. We're all very layered human beings. We see you play two layered human beings by yourself. It is brilliant. For you, what parts of LaKeith did you pull to play Clarence, versus what parts did you pull from to play Thomas?
Well, thank you. First of all, my mother's name is Karen, so it's a nice Freudian slip. Clarence was written so beautifully by Jeymes that it just really translated into who I was in my personal struggle and my struggle to become someone that I could be proud of and to bring my family to a better place. I started off, with not very much, and I knew that I wanted my family to exist in a place where they could be safe, where they could feel they had options, where they could have freedom. And that's what I've been trying to achieve throughout my life, throughout my career. And so I identify with that struggle and the means to get there and what that looks like. And sometimes it can not feel good to have to make hard decisions, to have to move away from home, to have to try and build something, establish something that you can bring back to your family.
Yeah.
And sometimes those trials and tribulations feel like they might lead to hopelessness or a hopeless space. But keeping that trust, keeping that faith, keeping your good foot forward and trusting and knowing in your ability to manifest, I think is key. Clarence had that, so I feel like that really resonated with me, and I hoped and knew it would resonate with others. And so Clarence was quite easy to fall into in that sense. And Thomas, brotherly rivalry. I have a lot of siblings, so I understand
How many siblings
what that's
do you have?
like. 10.
Oh, my goodness. Where do you fall in line?
I am second to the eldest. My brother is older than me by 2 years. And oftentimes we were, people would ask us if we were twins. We kind of look alike. I would follow him around, trying to do everything that he's doing, wanted to be like him. So I know what that looks like too. And so playing these brothers, it just resonated really closely with things that I understand. Also, I looked at it as just a mirror image. Your twin brother could exist as a metaphor for a mirror image of your own self.
Yeah.
Internal struggle, internal dialogue. The hardest thing sometimes to get out of your way in your path to completion is yourself.
Yeah.
So doing that internal inventory and investigation is important. I wanted to see that, but I also wanted Black people to see that and people at large to see that the biggest issue sometimes is our own ego. Getting that out the way can help you really truly flourish. So it was easy.
Absolutely. Let me pick back up on you mentioned Black people, and I love how racism, we see it as an undertow of this film throughout. Why was it important for you, Jeymes, to make that, a part of this particular story?
Well, racism was an undertone throughout that whole biblical era. Jesus himself, even though the movie is not about Jesus, it kind of is about an everyman that runs alongside Jesus. But Jesus was tried and convicted by the Romans, not by Jewish people. He was tried, convicted, sentenced, and eventually put to death by the Roman Empire, right? And it was a form of that Roman Empire was a huge thing. So every film in that biblical era shows the Roman Empire, even Spartacus, Ben-Hur, right? Even when you look at Gladiator, it's the Roman Empire. They were all over the place, and they were colonizers. They were just going in and expanding. It's crazy when you think of someone like Jesus having to answer to King Herod, and it's madness. But it is what it is, and so I wanted to show a movie that kind of depicted the environment that I grew up in, that LaKeith grew up in, that a lot of us grew up in, and every one of us sees, even if we don't grow up in it, but transport it to that era and show how much in alignment we have with the biblical era, and show how little things have changed. You know what I mean? Yeah. Whether a person believes in the Bible or not, we can all agree the book, any version of it, the King James version, is still a couple thousand years old, right? I feel like
absolutely.
Still reverts to stories a couple thousand years ago, and you can see how nothing has changed, which makes that book, like, whatever your belief system is, you could be Ricky Gervais, the biggest atheist on the planet, you would still say, okay, this book is relevant, just as relevant today as it was when it was written, when these stories were first told us, because of the behavior of human beings. It just doesn't, no matter how much guidance we're given by the Most High or by the Most Low, no matter how much guidance we're given, we just don't listen. Human beings have never changed. We just celebrated a movie called Oppenheimer, about a man that created the atom bomb. Like, human beings, man. That's why there's a line when people are being crucified in a film. It says, "Humans, God's only mistake." You know what I mean? Like, sometimes I look at human beings and I think, wow, man, are we a mistake of creation? We're capable of so much love, but we just concentrate on so much destruction. And I think that's why I wanted to have all of those themes and those storylines that we go through today in that era, and also just give the young kids that are watching films and stuff a new biblical epic that they can all relate to. All races can relate to. We know all races relate to Black people anyway, because everyone kind of takes our culture, but all races can relate to the Book of Clarence, because one is a story of an everyman, but two, you just know that environment, and in that environment you get things like racism and all of that stuff.
And I think it's important to note that the answer to that question as to whether we are a mistake or not is no. But I think that the conventions put in place, the programs that we're often downloaded with, the way that we treat each other, the way that we move undersells our godship, and it allows us to move in ways that are, if you're in an environment where you have to survive, you don't have time to think about how you should treat your brother because you're too busy trying to survive and trying to eat. So changing the environment, changing the way that we view things, changing us from the inside out is a way that we allow our godliness to flourish. And the way to do that is to investigate and to have faith and to walk with purpose and walk with knowing. If I know you're my brother, I can't do you like that.
That's right.
But if I think that you're something else or someone else, it's easy for me to think that destruction, anti-natureness is the way to be.
Anti-nature.
So it's all about changing that dial, changing that frequency.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I want to stick with faith. You all are preaching over here. I want to stick with faith for a minute and go to you here, LaKeith, because we talk about themes. Jeymes, you mentioned, we have faith, we have forgiveness, we have family, we have fortitude. We watch Clarence really and Thomas kind of go through these journeys of faith, Clarence is being the biggest one, the most obvious. For you, how did playing Clarence in particular either challenge your faith or grow you in your faith?
You know, it's when you go into a role, it's a lot. There are a lot of leaps of faith that I don't think people quite understand. First of all, you're trusting in the vision of a director and a team that is very large, hundreds of people on a set, on a you know a relatively big set. There's a lot of different people involved. There's someone whose job is to move the trash. There's someone whose job is to control the lights. There's someone whose job is to do hair, to do makeup.
Yeah.
And as an actor, you're sitting in all of these different chairs and trusting people with their artistic ability and integrity to help bring the story to life.
Yeah.
You have to have humility in that, and you have to learn how to trust fall, which is why it's so important to be able to choose your team. When Jeymes when he approaches me and he says, "Peace to the gods, peace to the young black gods," I understand that language. That's how I feel about myself. So it makes sense that he communicates in that way. With that kind of vision, I felt like I had the necessary accompaniment to fall into it and know that we were going to be moving in a path of something that we can create, that we can be proud of and move forward, and that our people can be proud of. And in order to get a message across, we have to do two things. We have to make people laugh, and we have to make people think. And that's what we've done.
Yes.
And that's why when the teaser came out, people might have seen that and thought, oh, maybe this is blasphemous. Trailer 2 is out now. Now you have more context. In this age of immediate gratification, often people aren't waiting for that context. But once you see it, you realize this is the furthest thing from blasphemous. In fact, it's right in line with the Gospels and right in line with the truth that we all universally understand.
Yeah.
You know, one man can get to a point of completion, but he has to go through the hard parts first. Sometimes the hard part is challenging preconceived notions. Hopefully that metaphor serves as a larger metaphor to the story. If you can get beyond the blockades placed in front of yourself by yourself, there's beautiful things to be yielded from that.
Yeah.
And Clarence was the vehicle to be able to show that. So in order for me to play him, I had to also have faith. I had to also develop this. I may not be able to necessarily see the light at the end of the tunnel right now. I'm in the thick of the work, but if I trust and I move forward, I can be surprised. This is the first movie I watched of mine. I'm very critical. The first one I watched of mine where I was like, I love this. Like, I'm usually like, there's something that I find that I'm like, there's something to pick at. There was nothing. I loved it. There's action, there's romance, there's brotherhood. There, you know, there's black love at the center of this. There's a relationship with God. There's a relationship with a younger black man that we see take place in this very tragic scene, but beautiful scene where the support is coming from the youth who love us. You know, we need this kind of imagery. With all of the stuff that's going on in the world, you know, you got, you know, violence happening in certain parts. We need to know that we can come together and we can exist as one.
Yeah.
That is who we are. And this film highlights that. And I'm passionate about that. And I'm really glad to be able to talk about that.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of things you could be talking about in Hollywood. We're talking about pushing us forward.
Absolutely.
And then by virtue of that, we push everyone forward. You know, now that we have this representation, other people could feel like they could represent their specific, like as we always do, open up the gates to possibility.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing.
Like when you listen to him speak, you understand why I always say if LaKeith turned down this movie, I wouldn't have made it. He's literally the only person on the planet that could play Clarence. Literally.
So was there an audition at all? It was just
No,
like, hey, LaKeith,
no,
you're my guy, let's go.
I met LaKeith. We had met a few years ago, but just in passing over some pizza. But go figure. But I'm actually allergic to dairy, and I still eat pizza. and I don't necessarily pay for it as much as everyone else. Around me. Like, oh, it's going down. But we met for The Harder They Fall, and we were speaking about the character Cherokee Bill. And LaKeith got a phone call from his cousin, and he had to, like, he said, I'll call you back in 15 minutes because something could have just happened in a hood. And and I relate to exactly what he was speaking about. When you get that call, no matter what you're doing,
Everything
let me just
stops.
take care of this right quick. And when he explained in 30 seconds, you must have gone through like 15 possibilities, right? 15 nefarious outcomes from this call. I'll call you back in 15 minutes. Click. I found Clarence. Because I've written Clarence in 2017. I had the idea from like 2004, 2005. I called my sister, Tanya, I've got Clarence. She's like, you got Clarence? I've got Clarence. Because when I wrote Clarence, I was like, how am I going to cast this role? They're identical twins. How am I going to cast it? Clarence runs through every single gamut of the human condition. just as we go through in these environments. He's impossible to cast. Someone who's quirky, who's strange, but is also a G in the hood. Someone who is like just has all of these personality traits that I am acutely familiar with. You know those people in the hood, but they're not actors. How am I going to find this guy? And LaKeith embodied every single one of them. So from the minute he got to set, I was like, look, after every take, there's something else I'm going to hit you with later. When we wrapped, I said, don't go too far. I have something else. We're not going to speak about it now, but I have something else. Literally, as soon as we finished with The Harder They Fall, I was like, okay, it's time. Dearly beloved, we've gathered here today to get through this thing called life. Electric world life, and it means forever. But I'm here to tell you, there's something else.
The suspense was killing me. And when he sent me the script, it was beautiful because there was just this little picture on the front page of a black man on a cross. And I was like, oh, here we go. I know this is about to be amazing. And I had no idea just how amazing it would be. And then, you know, it brought tears to my eyes. I don't even know if I ever told him this. I might have mentioned it, but after I read it, I was just crying for a minute because it was beautiful. I didn't think that in my lifetime I would read something like this that had seemed to be so deep-seated in me already that someone else saw that and was able to speak to it and able to actualize it. It's one thing to think about making films like this. It's another thing to make them. Yeah. And I was like, wow, we're here. We have arrived. It's time. Let's go.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah, beautiful.
I love the excitement around, like you mentioning, LaKeith, you see a black man on the cross and you're like, all right, this is next level. Yeah. There are people that will see that image and think the exact opposite. I'm a Christian. I wasn't offended by the movie at all. I'm also a creative. I thought it was exceptionally done. But I want you guys to get an opportunity to speak to people of the faith-based community who may have an issue with this. Before I ask you to do that, I will say to you both, especially you, Jeymes, there's satire through the film that I really thought was great. Yeah. But I was also able to see your acknowledgement of the sanctity of Christ's story.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't feel like you overstepped in that way. Actually, I thought you paid homage and great respect to the story of Christ. So for you, in hearing what I'm saying and knowing that there are people in the faith-based community who may say, I'm not seeing this. This is blasphemous. What say you both to them?
I would say that the Bible only exists, just like the Quran, just like the Torah, is because human beings are sinners. Otherwise, Moses wouldn't have ever had to speak to the burning bush. We are sinners, right? Mankind is the story of sinners. The first two, according to the Bible, Adam and Eve. God said, don't eat the apple. I'm going to the store right quick. I'll be back in a second. Don't eat that apple. And the serpent comes down, Eve and Adam, he came back, the apple was all bit. And like human beings have committed sin from the minute we made human beings were created. I would say this, Matthew 24:5, Jesus says, many will come and saying they are the Christ, and they would lead many astray. Jesus said that himself. It only takes a Google search to see that in Jesus' 33 years of life, there was 200 to 300 people in his lifetime saying they are the Messiah. The Bible speaks of Simon the sorcerer. Like, does anyone actually read the book they profess to know so much about? I really need to know. Ask your listeners, what currency did they use in the Bible days? What currency did they use? You see people with a dumbfounded face. Jesus himself spoke about this. The Book of Clarence is the story of an everyman, a man that was a disbeliever who goes on a journey of self-discovery and redemption and finds faith. He finds faith. For a person to say this film is blasphemy, they haven't watched the film. And if you watch the film and say this film is blasphemy, I have to ask you why. Is it because the people in the film are depicted of color? I need to know why. Ben-Hur would be... No one in the Bible looked like Charlton Heston, right?
No one, correct.
Even descriptions in the Bible look like the people, that we see every day. They didn't look like Kirk Douglas or Victor Mature or Max von Sydow. So that's my thing. Like the movie isn't blasphemous at all. I was brought up in a really strong household of really strong belief. Jesus pictures everywhere, and Jesus was the first superhero. Right? There's a scene in the trailer where you see Jesus stop the stones. Everyone goes, Jesus Nazareth. Someone said to me, "Oh, whoa, this looks like the Matrix." It don't look like the Matrix. The Matrix is the story of Neo. Neo is a ripoff of the story of Jesus.
Absolutely.
I just took it back. Give Jesus his props. And look, man, because I'm not getting those biblical epics, because I'm not being served them, because I'm not and I'll say this, my hand on my heart, because I'm not being delivered the films that I want to see and Jesus depicted in the right way, I had to do it myself. So I would say, you're welcome.
I totally understand people's, tendency to become cynical about Hollywood and what they produce and why they might be afraid of the depictions. I stress people to really try and ascertain the importance of storytelling and the importance of metaphor and the importance of word of mouth. You know, how we got stories. Cinema hasn't been around for a long time. There's not a lot of representations of what life might have been like in the biblical times. Yeah. And I think it's important to stress with this movie that it isn't a literal story about Jesus or about the Bible. Right. It's about maybe the guy who might have lived next door to Jesus or down the street, or maybe the guy who had a mundane job but saw the things that Jesus was doing and thought that he might be able to benefit from emulating that, and perhaps went about it the wrong way, had a real big lesson to learn as a result of that, and as a result of his lack of faith and trust and belief and knowledge. That's what this movie is about. And so if we can get past, what might be indicated to us in the superficial and the readily apparent on the surface, then there is really a rich story here to be derived. And the story is a story we all share. It's really important that we invest in these stories. And so, number one, we can see more representation of people that look like us in times in history where we've been written out. The way that we continue to do that is that we show up and we support. And number two, it's just beautiful for us to collectively go on a journey together of self-discovery. We all need to do that. White people need to see this movie. Yes. They need to understand that, oftentimes people might mention hip-hop being in the movie as, inappropriate because it's modern music. But if you think about it, the music that's used in the other movies that are biblical adjacent, that music was not made at the time Jesus was walking around. Yeah. They weren't playing Bach back then. You know what I mean? So we have to think about it for a second. This is artistic expression in the purest way, and it allows us to engage in conversation. It is important to engage in conversation. If we flee from conversation, we don't grow. We have to have conversations. And we took very careful, meticulous attention to detail to make sure that the last thing we wanted to do was isolate and offend people with this movie. That's not what this is about. We want to liberate people and have them liberate themselves, in fact. And the way you do that is you break the mental chains. The way you start to do that is you start to engage first in asking questions and surveying. That's the only way we move forward. So I'd ask people to give themselves a shot at feeling the peace that comes with freedom by taking a chance and letting down the preconceived notions. I promise you there's a treat here waiting.
Absolutely. And I'd also like to stress that, when you think of Jesus, and you ask yourself, how many disciples did Jesus have, right? There's like 7.5 billion people on the planet. Maybe those days there was like 6.5 billion people on the planet. Jesus had 12 disciples. He had 12 disciples. He didn't have 6.5 billion. All these people running around. I don't want to get on one so early in the morning, but you have people, but you know how you get me. You have people running around like, if Jesus came around today, right, and said, I am the Messiah, I am back, the exact same thing would happen to him. But the exact same thing would happen to him. One, he'd just be met with all disbelief, and all these people hollering blasphemy would be the choruses of naysayers that Jesus had when he was around. He had 12 disciples, not 7.5 billion. He had a few hundred people when he was speaking his sermons. Outside of that, everyone else was disbelievers. Clarence is a story of a disbeliever. You'll see all the layers therein. It's a story of a disbeliever, a man that eventually finds faith. But where I show Jesus and his apostles and Judas, usually we know Judas as one thing. Yeah. As one thing, just a man that betrayed Jesus. But we never really understand why or whatever. Even in the Book of Clarence, that's not about Jesus. This is the first time in a biblical epic where I've actually seen a 360 degree representation of Judas and his thought processes. It's one of the scenes I'm most proud of. That even Judas has color, right? You never see it. You just know Judas betrayed Jesus. So we say, you're Judas. And when you think about it, to conclude, Judas was an apostle. I am not worthy of being one of Jesus' total 12. And I've never met a person, maybe my mum, who's worthy of being one of Jesus' chosen dozen, right? The chosen dozen. The fact that Judas he was probably probably done the majority good and done one bad thing. My point is, this is a story of just the other things that take place, the other people that lived in that biblical era. And if you were told today a man walks on water, and you just heard these stories from a virgin birth, you'd question these things. That's why we have logic. Anyway, my point is, the movie doesn't blaspheme at all. I take painstaking effort, and so does LaKeith, in portraying the Christ in his godly essence.
By the way, you are absolutely in the right for questioning whether or not this film could be offensive.
Yeah.
That is what you should do,
Yeah.
and we all encourage people to question. I mean, that's what we do. We try to think critically about the art that we're making. It's just not mindless drabble and babble that we're doing without any regard for anything. That there wouldn't be anything worthwhile doing in that. Like I said, excavating and surveying is the whole entire point here.
Yeah.
When you put up a painting or a piece of art, the contemplation that comes behind it is where it derives its power.
Yeah.
We want people to ask questions. We want people to also see it, so that way they see it in its entirety, so we can really engage in conversation. And we can't wait to engage in those conversations. So go see Book of Clarence.
Yeah, and
Go
you
see it, guys.
you deserve this movie. You deserve it. We all deserve it. We all deserve to see ourselves in the biblical era. Tell me I'm wrong.
You're not wrong. You're right. You also said you're welcome, and I say thank you. They are trying to kick me out of the studio. I just want to thank you guys again, first of all, for the time, for sharing your gift with us, and for me. I hope we can do this again. This has been a very edifying conversation. Wishing you all the best. Guys, Book of Clarence drops
Thank you.
January the 12th, 2024. Make sure you check it out.
It's just a thought. Just my opinion. It's just a thought. It's just a thought. Get out your feelings. It's just a thought. It's just a thought. It's my opinion. It's just a thought. It's just a thought. Get out your feelings.